You have some way of articulating how whatever it is that you call your faith or your beliefs or the animating force of the universe, whatever it is that inspires and moves you deeply, is something that inspires and moves you to act in a way that is radically inclusive and fights for the inherent worth and dignity of all people. I would also bet that if you're here, you care about learning and growing, and you have a desire to continue to face your own prejudices and implicit biases. You know that you will always be learning and unlearning, but you are committed to being on the journey and being open to seeing the ways that you cause harm. So, friends, I want to talk today about a place where spirituality and common cultural thinking have perpetuated racial justice and harmed folks who identify as Black and brown. We're going to talk about our theology of darkness. And forgive me if theology is a word that you brush up against. I'm not talking about a big sky god or a white man on a chair in the sky, but I'm using that in the broadest possible sense of the word. So if you can, suspend your argument with the phrase and focus on the ideas. When I'm talking about our theology of darkness, I'm talking about the common cultural understandings and rampant language that uses words like Black and dark in negative contexts. These show up everywhere, and I'm going to ask you for your input as well. So here are some places where I have seen this idea popping up. In Harry Potter, there's a whole class called Defense Against the Dark Arts, and the dark arts are known to be those powers that harm, corrupt, or are evil in some way. From what I understand, I've never seen it, please don't come at me. In Star Wars, there's the Force and the dark side of the Force, and you know immediately which side is good and which is evil. Many sacred texts, including the Bible, talk about light overcoming darkness or light shining in the darkness, the people in darkness having seen a great light. The devil is even sometimes called the prince of darkness. In the same vein, these texts talk about being washed white as snow when people are cleansed from sin. The white knight is the hero and the dark knight is the villain. The dark night of the soul is one that is painful and tumultuous, one that we're wishing would end. For me, I think particularly about how we've made both solstices, both summer and winter, about light. Summer is, look how much light there is, and winter is, the light is coming back. We never have one saying, we're in the dark, or darkness is coming back. We celebrate spring because the days are getting longer, we're getting more light. But in the fall, no one is celebrating the return of the darkness. It's so automatic that light equals good and dark equals bad. So this is where I'm going to invite you to unmute and let me know if there are other examples that you can think of where this kind of language and thinking pops up.
A symbol in the old Westerns of the black hat and the white hat, the hero wearing the white hat and the villain wearing the black hat.
Perfect. Yep.
And I thought of in general conversations and a change of tone, people will say, "Oh, that got dark," or that, that,
When we went into negative topics, right? Like
Right.
suddenly we were talking about something difficult. And it's like, ooh, that got dark. And we don't want to be in that dark place. Yeah.
Is it the expression that's like calling the pot calling the kettle black?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have anything specific, but dark tends to be scary, fearful, all of the things that, creeping in the dark and
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're
lonely.
talking about chocolate.
We'll get there, Kathy. Save it. Give us like 2 minutes. That's wonderful. But yeah, being afraid of the dark, right? Like it's the whole thing. Yeah.
And it's kind of a natural thing that you don't know what's in that unseen place in front of you or whatever, go outside at night, or all of a sudden the power goes out and you're in the dark. It's I think it's relatively a natural response.
It is and it is and it isn't. Like I'm curious about that, because our like discomfort with not knowing doesn't have to be fear. But also like how we've taken that and turned it into the white-hatted cowboy being good and the black-hatted cowboy being bad is
Right.
also interesting to me, instead of saying there are gifts of both. I think for me, like another way that this shows up is, and this might be a couple steps, but how radical it is to like value sleep and evenings and downtimes, and that like that's not light darkness, but I think this sense that we can be on all the time gets us away from valuing darkness. I don't know. It's a couple leaps, but to me it's what's down that trail if you really keep going. So are there any other examples that folks can think of? Because these are amazing. This is like right on.
Well, just when you think about daydreaming, tends to be happy thoughts, but at night, nightmares, and tends to be more frightful again.
Yes. Yeah, these are so good.
Oh, just going back to thinking about the cowboy hats, white and dark. It's black and white in movies, so they needed to distinguish or be able to.
But why wasn't the
But
white
why those
cowboy the
colors?
good one?
Right. Well,
Well, does it have
light of the day was always better than the dark of the night, right? So
exactly.
Keeping
And
someone
bad
in,
luck if a black cat crosses your path.
Mm-hmm.
keeping someone in the dark,
Mm.
that's not exactly the same thing. It's just
Yeah. So this, we're gonna keep going because there's sort of more to this, obviously. This also extends to more subtle realms for me, like things being ruined if they are dirty or soiled. That contact with the darkness of the earth being a violation of what is good and right and clean. So when we automatically equate darkness with evil, sin, the absence of God, and light and white as markers of purity, excellence, holy presence, goodness, we are perpetuating racism and racist thinking. There's no way around it. How does that land in the hearts and minds and bodies of folks who identify as Black and brown, dark, right? In case this weren't plain enough, consider the facts and phenomenon of colorism, in which the darker a person's skin tone, the more racism they will experience, whether that manifests as the enormous industry of skin lightening creams, or lighter skinned actors getting more prominent roles in films and TV shows. It's clear that every shade matter, every shade closer to whiteness and lightness is a shade closer to goodness and acceptance and success. I can't come up with an exhaustive list of these examples because they're endless, and also because I want that to be your job. I want you to investigate and interrogate the places where this language and these ideas arise. Be on the lookout for these things. Have it on your radar and start to notice where that's popping up. But what I also want to do is try to offer some alternatives, because this good, evil, light, dark opposition is not in every culture. And I'm really curious about the places where there are more horizontally transcendent ideas, by which I mean cultures and ways of thinking that value both light and dark as equally nourishing and important. The first example that comes to my mind is the yin and yang of Chinese philosophy. These two forces, while different, are complementary, interdependent, and interconnected. It's impossible to have more yang than yin. There is a natural and inevitable, even enviable, balance between the gifts of both the light and the dark, the day and the night, what we consider good and what we consider difficult. In a similar vein, Thich Nhat Hanh famously says, "No mud, no lotus." There is the union of the dark and the light. Farming and the earth's natural cycles are also great teachers of this, the mud and the lotus. Many crops need rest and seed germination time and overwintering, and they're nourished by the rich black earth. That is where they get all the nutrients. How do we reclaim that? How do we embrace a little dirt under our fingernails and appreciate the gift of darkness, of winter? In a way, Jungian analysis and reclamation of the shadow is another way in which that which was ostracized for being dark and unsavory gets to be valued and reclaimed as important, even vital. Again, I can't provide a comprehensive list, and this one is admittedly harder for me to make. I wonder if you have ideas or know of places where darkness and blackness are valued, enviable, nourishing, good. I love the dark chocolate, Kathy. That's wonderful. White chocolate is definitely not as good. Dark chocolate is a good start. But what else comes to mind for you when we're talking about a different way or ways that darkness, blackness is valued in our imagery and symbolism and thinking? Again, jump in here if you have thoughts.
I'm thinking, especially for gardeners, the dark black soil that nourishes the seeds.
Mhm.
And I'm going to connect it with Mother's Day. No womb, no baby.
Mm. Mm.
The connection that I saw is I love seeing stars at night. And if there's too much light, you can't see the stars. You need the darkness in order to be able to see.
Oh my gosh, these are so fun.
That's great.
I've done this quote before, Arlo Guthrie, and I forget what the context was, but he said, "You can't have a light without a dark place to stick it in." I think he
To
was
me,
talking
that
about,
feels a little bit like light fixing the problem of darkness.
right.
But I don't know, maybe that lands differently for other people.
Looking at the science of that, though, darkness is the absence of light.
Mm-hmm.
Cold is the absence of heat. So you got to temper some of the discussion, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about, if you think about piano keys, white and dark, there's no good or evil. They just have different sounds, right? But in chess, white and dark pieces, white goes first, is always the advantage over the black piece, which has to go second.
Oh,
I didn't know that about chess. Interesting. Hmm.
well,
I
here's
don't know if this,
Go ahead, Deb.
I don't know if this applies or not, but when my kids were little, they always used to play night games where they'd go out in the dark and play hide and seek and tag and stuff. So they weren't afraid of the dark at that, doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up further south from here, it was much easier. It got darker earlier, and we would play a lot of fun games at night. Yeah. I thought of this, the desire or the beauty of black for like dressing up, tuxedo, or the basic black dress, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Black tie being formal. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also am really interested, and I, want to think about it in a horizontal way instead of replacing one over the other, because I think it's that imbalance that's so, and obviously the power in one versus the other, but it made me think about places like deserts that just have way too much light, right? And like not like being scorched by, I mean, they do get night in the desert, so, but just something about that, like yang, not having enough yin of the water and just solar. It's like, oh, you know, the moon, how we pay attention to the moon. I also think about when I was living in Alaska, the winters were really hard and we all got really snippy by the end. But I actually, and shared this experience with a lot of my friends, like the summer was almost more difficult because it was like all the time and my body had no idea when to rest or how to rest anymore. Like there were a lot of ways to make my dark home light in the winter. And there were very few ways besides just like shutting out the whole world or like living in a box to like get darkness. And so we really craved darkness over the summer because it was so hard to find. So that was a really interesting experience that I didn't expect living in Alaska. Like, I'm gonna miss the darkness even though I felt smothered by it. And so it's that imbalance of one more than the other, which is why that yin yang of Chinese philosophy of the necessity of balance and value in both is really inspiring to me.
I have a food one.
Yeah.
If you roast vegetables so they get dark, it brings out the sweetness in the vegetables.
Ooh.
And I am marginally light sensitive, and I don't know when it was last week or whenever it was. They said that we'd just gotten over like 6 days in a row that was overcast, and I was like, oh yeah, that was kind of nice. I like a sunny day, but I don't mind a cloudy, like tempered light, you know.
Mm-hmm.
When
And
you're
just
talking about the desert, I think the coldest I've ever been was camping in the desert. When it gets dark, it gets really cold.
Mm-hmm.
talking about colors, I was speaking with someone from Indonesia, and he was talking about how people, and he lives there, so he was talking kind of as the point of reference was people with darker skin versus those with lighter skin, and he was saying yes, those who have a lack of melanin in their skin can have these health conditions, and that I guess was kind of eye-opening to me. And also I find it interesting, and this is kind of a separate thing, but talking about colors in Spain, the color that they talk about as being the bad color is green and the good color is blue. So green and blue versus black and white.
Ooh, I did not know that about Spain. And I love that lack of melanin framing. Thank you.
It'd be
I thought it was very interesting.
interesting to know how people who live on the equator think about dark and light, because it is totally imbalanced at the equator.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at a photo that's all black and white, and I'm thinking about when you draw, your picture comes out as you put in the shadows, all the dark areas. Some of them a little bit less dark, some of them very dark, and then you have all of a sudden something that's really alive.
Cool. You made me think of the fact that when I read, I want black writing on a pale background, which means the value is in the dark part.
Some people would say,
I'll say in tech, we actually, and a lot of people are more now valuing, you actually want the darker, more gray background with the white like lettering, because that's less strain on your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh-wee.
I think there is a difference though, like screen versus print, like of those two things, because of the way that like light is coming through the screen. And so it's less strain on the eyes when there's less of that light coming in. But yes, I'm loving these. It sounds like there may be a couple more.
Yeah, some people would say that when people's black hair turns white, that's a bad thing.
Mm.
Going back to the letters, I think you make an interesting point, because I think what I hear from you saying that is that there's value when it's black letters on white or tan paper, and then there's also value when there's white letters on a black background. They're not better or worse, but they both have value for different situations.
I love that.
Like, just going back to the, like, what Megan was talking about with the equator being equal, because that's what I was thinking, that same line. But in the general term, over a 365 days, you have equal lightness and darkness pretty much from the North and South Pole. It's just that it's when you get it. Equator, you get it 12 and 12, pretty much, you know, between the Capricorn and, ooh, I lost the other one. Those 2 points where it always 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
The Tropic of Cancer?
Yes, Capricorn and Cancer.
When
Paula
you're
reminded me of another.
sorry.
Oh, I was just going to toss in quick. You reminded me of another, like, good and bad with light and dark, of like blonde hair in our culture being attractive and like darker hair being like, I think we're getting a little bit better at that, but like the primacy of blondness and light hair versus dark hair. I don't know, maybe that was just like a young girl thing that was socialized into me, but like the blonde girls were pretty, and the, you know, they even have like a special word like blonde, like not yellow hairs or something, right? Like I have brown hair. I'm a girl, so I can like be a brunette at least, but we all know that's not as good as blonde, right? Like the blonde girl with the lighter hair is going to be the best one. Anyways.
But how many jokes are associated to which color?
Dumb blondes.
It's not a one-to-one, but that just was like, oh, to me, look, there's another way that is divided and put into an over-under. Someone else had another one.
But there's also, just to balance that out, there's tall, dark, and handsome on the guy side. So,
well, there you go.
We have a way of celebrating the nightlife where fun things happen.
Yeah.
Can't have the 4th of July until it gets dark. I mean, there's a lot of celebration going on in the darkness.
Yeah.
I remember canoeing when there were days the wind was so relentless all day that we had to wait until night to paddle because it was calmer.
Mm.
When you said that, I thought about dark water. You can't see in it, so in darkness is mystery.
Mm.
In lightness, everything is almost too clear. We need mystery.
Mm.
Dark water's scary to me.
Mm-hmm.
In the dark, your imagination runs more wildly vibrant. But it can go either way. As far as like happy places, not happy places.
Someone correct me. I feel like I'm remembering some movie about like prehistoric people, and they were always glad when it was night because it was so much easier to hide from predators. Like they felt safer at night because they weren't as exposed. Yeah, I don't remember if I'm remembering that correctly, but that's just, again, I don't think that there are easy answers to any of this. I just am really curious about the questions. So I guess I'm going to kind of wrap this up because I don't think this message really has a conclusion, and I don't want to wrap this up neatly. if I've done my job today, it's to bring something new to our awareness or bring something to light so that when this thinking pops up, when these images pop up in media or literature or sacred text or everyday conversation, we can hear them and be curious about them. And when alternative imagery arises, when we encounter the beauty and celebration of darkness, we're ready to really tend that and take that in as well. So I will end our time here, however, with a quote from a Black theologian named Wesley Morris, who writes about what a truer and more helpful theology of darkness might be able to offer. So Wesley writes, "I am convinced that voices from the darkness speak with ringing clarity. These voices and people have been willfully unseen and disrespected by Western theology. Dark faith, in this sense, becomes a cloak of familiarity with and to the soul of the oppressed across the world." It is my hope that by exploring these images, we can tend with and to the soul of the oppressed across the world and just find one more little avenue to unlearn some of the ways our thinking perpetuates systemic racism. Chuck, if you have a song for us, that would be great.